What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I know I'm a little bit late to this party, but I've been really busy for the last few days, and so I figured I'd go ahead and offer my thoughts, such as they are, on Spider-Man staying in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I really don't even know if anybody cares anymore, but nonetheless, I think that Spider-Man staying in the MCU actually saves it, and I know it seems to run sort of counter to the video that I made before, where I was talking about the Sony Disney deal, and I still believe that Disney was not unreasonable for requesting what they requested, but the irony of this all is that in my red notebook, this is my note-taking book, I actually outlined a plan to essentially create a 10-year-long epic in Sony that would involve like Venom and a lot of the villains, things like that, that would basically create this kind of 10-year-long epic, similar to what Marvel did for the first 10 years of the MCU, that would culminate in essentially an an Infinity War / Avengers Endgame kind of story that would fall rank and file and would actually involve the character of Null the Symbiote God. But I don't think that's gonna happen. I've got it charted out, it's really cool. I'm sure a lot of you guys are probably gonna be like, tell us what it is. but nonetheless, so, with Spider-Man staying in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it basically keeps it afloat. And here's the reason why. When you look at the MCU for the last 10 years, what would you say, like if I walked up to you and I said, what would you say the overarching theme of the last 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was? I think most people would say it was the rise and fall of Tony Stark. And indeed it was. It's not really to tear down the movies that were made, with Captain America and Thor and The Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton, I enjoyed that actually, I really liked it, but it's not really designed to tear down any of the other actors who were part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Really, it's successful because of everything they contributed. But I really do feel like it was the rise and fall of Tony Stark, not in a moral sense, not in the sense that Tony Stark was a dick and then he became a good guy, then he went back to being a dick again. It wasn't anything like that. It was the rise and fall of Tony Stark insofar as Tony Stark was a guy who was selfish and only really cared about himself, and that was basically it. And then he learned what it meant to become a superhero, and then became a good guy, and then went out in a blaze of glory. That was basically it. It's like the Jean Grey effect under Chris Claremont, right? So because of that, when you look at the character of Tony Stark, he anchored us to the MCU, right? Like we were following his story. We were following the story of Tony Stark in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. When you look at the character of Captain America is intriguing because he was a man out of time, right? He was a guy who was virtually a nobody, and then seemingly overnight became probably the most capable person on the planet Earth at that point in time. And then, of course, went through his whole story arc, and then ultimately seemed to have died. But with these characters, with Iron Man and with Captain America, what makes them stand out is the fact that they're relatable, right? That's what makes them stand out, is the fact that they're tangible, right? Like we can feel like we're part of them. We can feel like we're part of their story. Each one of these guys has something interesting to offer that really sort of expands and makes the MCU special. For Tony Stark, a lot of us have been in situations where we wanted to get out, right? Or we've improved on ourselves as human beings. And looking at Tony Stark, it's the story of any average Joe out there, right? They start into this world and they become a person, they become some version of themselves for some period of time, and maybe they become disillusioned with it, or maybe they decide they want to change their ways and become something better. But it's basically the story of redemption. This idea that just because you're a person now does not mean you're going to be that kind of person for the rest of your life, that it's never too late to change. When you look at Captain America, he's a man out of time, right? Which of us have never been in a situation where we felt out of place, right? Captain America's story is kind of in the extreme, right? He's literally time displaced, right? Frozen in ice for 70 years and then thawed out in a world that he doesn't even begin to recognize. But when you look at him, like it's sad and it's relatable, right? Because everything he knew and loved is gone. In the first Captain America movie, he lost Bucky Barnes, and then of course he's frozen in ice at the end of that movie. And then he wakes up and he tries to find some semblance of the life he knew, only to realize that Peggy Carter moved on, that she formed a family, and that was basically it. And now she's got Alzheimer's. She can remember him for 10 minutes at a time, and then eventually she dies. There was no real way for Captain America to fit in. The time period he was living in was not his time, and that was never his home, and it never would be his home. And he didn't actually find his home until the end of Avengers Endgame, when he went back to the past and lived a full life with Peggy Carter. And so when you look at those things, it's like it's touching and it's relatable in a lot of ways, because we've all felt out of place. We've all felt like we're not where we're supposed to be, or something's missing out of our lives or something along that. And we could take our own experiences and we could literally project them onto Iron Man and onto Captain America and then go forward from there. That's why people love them so much. For the character of Thor, he's intriguing, but Thor wasn't really doing anything that hadn't already been done. Thor was arrogant, he was full of hubris, and he was punished for it by being banished to the realm of Earth in order to learn humility. Well, Iron Man learned humility when he was in a cave, building a suit with a box of scraps. But he was learning that humility. So we'd already seen that. We'd already seen that dance. Maybe it was dance was a little more fast paced when it came to Thor, but it was still the same dance. And so again, each one of these characters is intriguing. And then you look at the character of Spider-Man. And so when you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe as it stands right now, and really even any Spider-Man film, the question is what makes him fun? Or like what makes a Spider-Man movie interesting? Well, Spider-Man learns about, with great power must come great responsibility and all that kind of cool stuff. But what makes Spider-Man movies enjoyable are the transitions. Flying, like swinging alongside Spider-Man. There's a reason why when you go and see one of the movies with this character that you don't have a locked off shot, right? Which is to say a camera sitting on a tripod and you got this big green screen and all the camera shows as far as the green screen CGI shows you is Spider-Man just swinging down, a building. That's not how it works. Instead, Spider-Man jumps off a building and then you swoop down with him and then he swings back up and then he shoots his webbing and then he swoops down and maybe he might do a backflip and then get really low to the ground and back up again. That's what makes the Spider-Man film so enjoyable, is following him when he's web slinging and all that kind of stuff. Now in the MCU, that wasn't a huge part of it. And the MCU was more about the story of Peter Parker, about what it meant to become a superhero, but his story was intrinsically tied into Iron Man, right? Like that's how people perceived it. Peter Parker was gonna be the next Iron Man. He was gonna be the replacement for Tony Stark. And in fact, that's literally what it was. Tony Stark left him the glasses, said, you're my heir, essentially. And so because of the fact that Peter Parker was really the last remaining character in the MCU that we could identify with, it didn't really leave anybody else after he left, right? I mean, what's the story of Sam Wilson Falcon? Like, you don't know about his parents. You don't know his backstory. You know he was in the military, and that's it. That's really, the only thing you really know about Falcon is what you learned along the way when he was a sidekick of Captain America. What's the story of Bucky Barnes? The story of Bucky Barnes, he was a childhood friend of Steve Rogers. Okay. Now, you don't know what his upbringing was like. You didn't see the flashbacks to when he was a little kid and being raised by his parents when he first met Steve Rogers. Like, you didn't really get a whole lot of that. I mean, you did to a degree, but only insofar as it related to Steve Rogers. It was the story of Steve Rogers being told, and Bucky Barnes was just kind of along for the ride, and so because of that, you look at the character of Black Widow and you look at the character of Hawkeye. Hawkeye was interesting because of the fact that he's a guy with a family that we didn't know about, and then eventually we discovered it. And it really wasn't until he became Ronin that he really became interesting, and that was for a very, very short amount of time. For Black Widow, we're gonna get her backstory in a movie, but up until the point where we see her backstory, she's just a character who's there, who's a really good spy. There really isn't a whole lot going for the characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe outside of the ones that are considered to be, top billing, right? Iron Man, Captain America, and Spider-Man. Makes sense because Iron Man built the MCU, Captain America is Captain America, and Spider-Man is the face of Marvel, so it makes sense in that regard. The question is, if you yank Spider-Man out of that, what kind of effect will it have on the MCU? I mean, Marvel's making movies about the Eternals, Marvel's making movies about Shang-Chi, Marvel's making movies about Blade, and while that's cool, what people need and what people wanted when it came to the next phase of the MCU is something to carry them over. People didn't want to go see the new phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and feel like it's totally disconnected from everything that happened before it. And removing Captain America, removing Iron Man from the landscape leaves only Spider-Man. And if you cut him out, there's no connection. There's nothing that makes me feel like what I'm seeing is part of the last 10 years. It makes me just feel like the last 10 years might as well not have happened, and now we just have what's going on next. Now, a lot of that really kind of remains to be seen in terms of how the movies are played out and how they're done. But if they're anything like the origin stories of years gone by, then they're gonna be isolated. They're gonna be kept in kind of a closed off confinement, confined space. And that's basically gonna be it. There might be a few references to what happened before, but it won't feel cohesive. It won't feel tied into everything else. I mean, think about the Thor movie, the Thor, was it Thor 1? Think about that. That was a movie that was kept solo and in isolation. Think about the Ant-Man film, Scott Lang. Think about I don't know, like Iron Man 1 or 2 or 3. Think about like Captain America 1. Like for the most part, all the solo films, all the films that were designed to focus on a particular character did just that and didn't really incorporate a ton of elements to the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe that made it feel cohesive. What made it feel cohesive were the Easter eggs. Captain America's shield showing up in the Iron Man, in one of the Iron Man movies, really in the first and second Iron Man film. Thor's hammer falling in New Mexico, like Tony Stark going to visit Thunderbolt Ross at the end of the Incredible Hulk film and saying, I'm forming a team, and Nick Fury showing up at the end of Iron Man 1 in the post-credit scene saying, I'm forming the Avengers. That's what made the films cohesive. Guardians of the Galaxy, the exact same way. And so because of that, having no feeling of cohesiveness would ultimately make the MCU, like, I don't know if it would totally destroy it, but I don't know if it would really make it to the next 5 to 10 years the way that Marvel hopes. If it did, it would limp along. Because Blade's an interesting character, sure, but Blade in Marvel Comics was always out there in no man's land. He was always isolated from pretty much everything else. He'd cross over a few times, sure, but Blade was a character that dealt with vampires, monsters, different things like that. You didn't really see Blade team up with the Avengers all that often. It was just kind of his stories out there by himself doing his own thing. And a lot of the solo stories are like that. It's only really, it's intriguing in that way. And so because of that, you're talking about removing a character from the landscape of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's the only real connection fans have to the last 10 years. And then saying, everybody get ready for the next 5 to 10 years. And this is kind of like, but why though? Because you feel like a part of yourself is missing, because we were a part of that journey. We were there. A lot of people, and believe it or not, a lot of folks grew up with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They were really, really young when they saw Iron Man 1, and they're, however old they are now, they're 13 or they're 17 or they're 20 or something like that, with having seen the last 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They grew up with it. It encompassed their preteen, their teenage, and their young adult years. And so to remove that connection would ultimately, I think, stifle and possibly even kill the MCU, especially if the Blade movies, the Shang-Chi film, the Eternal film, if those are not well received. If those are just kind of like, meh, and people aren't really feeling them, which is entirely possible. One of the things to keep in mind about the MCU, while they have done some great movies out there, doesn't mean that they're incapable of failing. It doesn't mean they're incapable of making a bad film. I mean, look at Thor 3, or Thor 2, rather. Thor 3 I thought was it was pretty enjoyable if you enjoyed comedy. Thor 2, I think we can all just kind of agree was just not good, and just kind of go from there. But nonetheless, I think Spider-Man staying in the Marvel Cinematic Universe keeps the Marvel Cinematic Universe alive. I think it keeps it afloat. I think it helps to carry the fan base, the movie-going audience from the last 10 years over into the next 10 years, or next 15 years, or however many years that we have. And that's really that's what they're gonna need. They're gonna need to have a series of film. They're gonna need to have a connecting film, some kind of film that brings, that sort of bridges the gap between the previous, eras, the Infinity Saga, basically, between one saga to the next, that keeps people attached, keeps people going, and keeps people believing that it's all part of one great, big, huge, giant, cohesive story, which really kind of begs the question, is there one great, big, huge story arc here? Or is it really just a series of disconnected sagas? And if that's the case, does that bode well? Like, is that something that people are interested in seeing? I guess only time will tell, but nonetheless, that's kind of my stance here, is that Spider-Man staying in the Marvel Cinematic Universe keeps it alive. It keeps it afloat. It gives it a better chance of succeeding in the interim between the time that it ended, or at least the time that Avengers Endgame ended, and when the X-Men and the Fantastic Four show up. Because at the end of the day, I think we can all really kind of agree that while we are going to see some cool stuff, I am interested in seeing Doctor Strange 2, going into the multiverse with Scarlet Witch. While I am interested in seeing Blade and seeing Shang-Chi and the Eternals film, I'm looking forward to all that stuff in the Disney Plus shows. While I'm looking forward to seeing all those things, at the end of the day, they're really just kind of holdover stuff. They're just holding me over until the X-Men and the Fantastic Four get in. That's really what it is. And I think for most people, it's that way. Like, hey, that stuff's cool though, but like Wolverine though, like I really want to see Wolverine, like I want to see Deadpool, like I want to see all that stuff, We're just kind of waiting for those films to come in, which is really what we're looking forward to the most. But with that being said, guys, let me know down in the comments section. Let me know what you guys think. How do you guys feel? Let me know how you guys see this. But anyway, with that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Hey, here's a question. Is doing that really like a rude gesture overseas? I don't know. I always just did it because it was a peace sign. I guess people say to do that instead, but that feels stupid. It makes me feel like a hippie. So anyway, with that being said, I will catch you all later. Peace. I don't know.